My name is Hannah Mitchell. I'm 33 years old and I live alone in a small town outside Westfield, Ohio. Some people hear that and imagine peace, maybe even solitude by choice. But I've learned that being alone and being unseen are two different things. I didn't choose invisibility, I was born into it. I was the first child, and for the first 2 years of my life, I think my parents might have actually noticed me. My mom kept a small baby journal with 2 pages filled in my birth date, the name of the hospital, and a note about how quiet I was compared to the other babies in the nursery. That was it. By the time I was 3, my brother Jason was born, and the rest of the journal remained blank. Jason arrived like a spotlight in a dim room. He had colic for the first few months, and I remember Mom carrying him around the house while I played alone in the corner, quietly stacking wooden blocks. It's funny what your memory holds onto the things you didn't realize meant something until later, like the way Jason's cry always brought someone running while mine was something I was gently asked to stop. Growing up, the differences weren't dramatic. They were quiet, subtle, but constant. Jason got praise for finishing his vegetables while my straight A report cards were met with a polite nod. When he drew stick figures on the wall, Mom laughed and called it creativity. When I won second place in the school's reading contest, she said that's nice and went back to folding laundry. On birthdays, Jason always had a party. There was cake balloons and a small crowd of relatives with their phones out, filming him blowing out candles. My birthdays were different. I remember one year I got a pair of gray socks with the tag still on them. Jason had gotten a new mountain bike just 2 months earlier for doing well in school, though his grades were average at best. I still remember holding those socks in my lap, turning them over, slowly pretending they were something else, anything else. When I looked up, Mom said without irony, "Girls don't really need bikes." There are snapshots in our old family albums, but even in the pictures, I'm slightly out of focus. My brother in the center laughing. My dad crouched down beside him, my mother's arms around him tightly, me standing a step away off to the side. Eyes open, watching. Jason was the star of every conversation, his little league games, his piano recitals, which he never practiced for, and his endless supply of needs and wants. I was expected to understand to be mature. "You're the older one," they'd say when I asked for the same attention or help with homework. I learned that asking only led to disappointment. I became good at doing things on my own, good at being small. I kept a stack of certificates under my bed, perfect attendance top of the class, spelling B runner-up. I never showed them to anyone after second grade. They just felt like secrets I wasn't supposed to be proud of. I used to imagine pulling them out one day, maybe in high school, and my mom finally being surprised, maybe even proud. But the longer I waited, the more they started to feel like artifacts from a museum. No one visited. Jason, for all his charm, never had to prove anything. If he passed a class, the whole house celebrated. When he lost his place on the baseball team for missing practices, Mom baked him a pie. "Everyone needs a break," she said. I once got grounded for forgetting to take the trash out. That's the thing about favoritism. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through everything, through the quiet moments you're left out, through the choices made for holidays, seating arrangements at dinner, who gets the last piece of cake. I noticed them all, and eventually I stopped trying to be noticed. The worst part was not the absence of affection, it was the denial of it. If I brought it up even gently, I was told I was imagining things. "We love you both the same," my dad would say as he handed Jason the remote for the third night in a row. "You've always been independent," my mom added once, as if that excused forgetting I existed at all. Independence became my identity. Not because I chose it, but because I had to live it. I stopped expecting praise support or fairness. I learned how to fill my own lunchbox in elementary school. I learned how to iron my own shirts in middle school. By the time I turned 16, I had a part-time job and saved money for my own birthday gift. No one asked why. No one ever noticed that I stopped waiting. I used to think that all families had these kinds of dynamics, that every older sibling played second fiddle to a younger one, that every daughter eventually learned to expect less. It wasn't until I left home that I realized not everyone carries silence like armor. I don't tell people these things often. It sounds like I'm complaining or worse, still hoping for something that will never come. But these early truths shaped me. They're the reason I keep my voice steady in meetings. The reason I say I'm fine, even when I'm falling apart. The reason I don't ask for help? I don't visit home much anymore. It's not a dramatic decision, not the kind you declare at a dinner table or write into a letter. It's quieter than that. You just start saying maybe next time, and before long, next time becomes a year, maybe two. And strangely, no one notices. Or if they do, they never ask why. The last time I did go back was for Father's Day. Brianna had insisted on hosting at my parents' house, even though it wasn't hers, and she never lifted a finger to help. My mother welcomed the suggestion, of course, calling her such a blessing, like Brianna had single-handedly saved the family from chaos. I brought a bottle of wine and a small gift for my dad. Nothing extravagant, just something I thought he'd like. He barely looked at it. Jason was already there when I arrived, parked in the driveway like he always belonged at the center. He waved with one hand, scrolling through his phone with the other. When I walked in, Brianna was sitting on the couch, one of their 3 kids draped across her lap like a shawl. She was in her usual uniform, perfect hair, pressed white blouse, too much perfume. She didn't stand up, just glanced at me and smiled like she'd just caught a bad smell. "Hannah, you made it," she said. "We weren't sure you would." It wasn't a warm welcome, and it wasn't meant to be. I said hi to the kids, hugged my mother, and sat in the corner of the living room where I always end up, the chair furthest from the kitchen, out of the flow of conversation, out of the way. Dinner was the same as always, too loud, too full of stories I wasn't part of. Jason dominated the conversation, of course. He had a story about a rough day at work, and everyone listened like it was news from the front lines of war. Brianna interrupted to talk about how hard it's been raising 3 kids basically on her own, which got nods of sympathy and praise for being so strong. My mom jumped in, then offering to watch the kids more during the week so Brianna could rest, though Brianna hasn't held a job in 5 years. My father, meanwhile, passed around a bowl of overcooked green beans and muttered something about how hard Jason worked to keep everyone afloat. And me! I sat there smiling politely, chewing slowly, and waiting for someone to look my way. They didn't. It's not that they hate me. That would require acknowledgement. It's more like they forget I'm in the room. The conversation flows over and around me like water around a rock. I ask about the kids. I ask if my mom's knee is doing better. I compliment the food, but none of it lands. My words vanish into the air the moment they leave my mouth. At one point, Jason looked up from his phone and said, "Hey, Hannah, are you still doing that office job thing?" The way he said it, you'd think I worked at a mall kiosk. "I'm a marketing coordinator. I said I was promoted last year." "Oh," he said, then turned back to Brianna. "Anyway, like I was saying." That's how it always goes. I'm the pause between their sentences, the filler. After dinner, the kids ran down the hallway and into what used to be my old room. I heard them laughing, dragging something across the floor. I followed and stood in the doorway for a moment. The posters I once had on the wall were gone, replaced by peeling paint. The window blinds were bent at the corners. Baby toys were scattered across the carpet, and an old laundry basket had been turned into a makeshift playpen. There was a cracked mug on the dresser, one I'd made in a high school ceramics class, still holding on by a chip at the rim. Brianna came up behind me and said, "We figured it was better to use the space. You're not really here much." I nodded, pretending it didn't bother me. She picked up the mug and looked at it like it was a foreign object. "Did you make this?" "Yeah, I said years ago." She shrugged and set it back down a little harder than necessary. Later that evening, while Jason and my dad watched the game, I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. My mother came in and handed me more plates. "You don't have to do that," she said automatically. "I don't mind," I said. She stood there for a second, folding a napkin like it mattered. Then she said, "You know it's really good to have everyone together." I smiled and nodded, even though I didn't feel like part of the everyone. I was the helper, the extra, the one who fit in, only when someone needed a seat filled or a task completed. After that night, I decided I was done going back, unless I had a reason, a real one. Not guilt, not obligation, not the hope that this time someone might notice I was there. I stopped replying to group texts unless it was something logistical. I kept my distance. I stopped sending birthday reminders and picking up the slack. I stepped back. And no one called to ask why. I've learned that in families like mine, silence is more than a habit. It's an ecosystem. Everyone plays their role. Jason is the favorite, Brianna is the fragile genius, my parents are the enablers, and me, I'm the reliable ghost. I show up when I'm needed and disappear just as easily. It's not the life I wanted, but it's the one I've learned how to live. Better to be alone by choice than overlooked in a room full of people who only see you when they need something. Sometimes I think about what it would take for any of them to see me clearly, and every time I do, the answer feels smaller. It starts to look like this, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I see myself now, and I don't need them to do it first. I still remember the way the email lit up my phone screen. It was mid-March, just after sunrise, and I was sipping coffee in the kitchen of my small apartment, trying to pretend everything was fine. The subject line read, "Team Restructure Announcement." I already knew what it meant before I clicked. The message was brief. My position at the marketing firm had been eliminated due to the economic downturn. They wished me the best and thanked me for my contributions. I sat there for a while watching the words blur together. There was no meeting, no personal phone call, just that email. At first, I told myself it was temporary. A few weeks, maybe a couple of months. I had some savings, I could tighten my spending. But then the rent came due, and then the next month, and I still hadn't landed a single interview. I applied everywhere: agencies, local businesses, grocery stores, even online gigs with questionable pay. Nothing. I held out as long as I could, stretching every dollar buying groceries one item at a time, cutting the heat early, even as the nights dropped below freezing. Then my lease expired, and my landlord made it clear he needed the apartment back. I packed what I could fit in my old Ford Ranger and left the rest behind. It felt like I was dissolving piece by piece. I remember pulling into a Walmart parking lot just outside of town that first night. I sat in the driver's seat for hours, engine-off fingers tucked under my arms for warmth. I stared out at the pale streetlight overhead and thought, this is temporary, just a week or two. I made a bed out of folded blankets in the camper shell attached to the truck bed. It wasn't insulated, and in the Ohio spring, the cold seeped through every seam. I'd curl up in 3 layers of clothes, tuck my hands into my waistband, and breathe into my collar just to stay warm. The roof dripped condensation by morning. I still had my phone at least, and one day I finally worked up the nerve to call my parents. I hadn't told them how bad things had gotten. I had told no one, really. The shame sat on my chest like a weight I couldn't move. But I thought maybe if they knew, they'd offer a place to stay just until I got back on my feet. My mom answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart, it's been a while," she said. I explained everything: the job loss, the eviction, how I just needed a place to crash for a few weeks while I got back on track. I kept my voice steady, tried to sound practical, like I wasn't falling apart. There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of her laughing. "Are you serious?" she said. "Hannah, this house is full. We've got Jason's kids here most weekends and Brianna needs quiet during the day. We can't just take in another person." I didn't say anything at first, I couldn't. "It's not personal," she added in a tone that made it feel exactly that. "You're an adult. You'll figure it out. Maybe this will build some character." I don't remember what I said after that. I think I hung up. Maybe I thanked her first? I don't know. All I remember is sitting in that parking lot in stunned silence, staring at the dashboard, trying not to scream. They didn't even ask if I was safe. That night, I drove to a quieter part of town and parked behind a strip mall. I didn't sleep. I kept waiting for a flashlight to tap on my window for someone to tell me I didn't belong there. I guess they wouldn't be wrong. The days turned into weeks. I learned how to get by. I bought a cheap gym membership just for the showers. I brushed my teeth in gas station bathrooms and learned which cafes didn't mind me charging my phone for a while. I kept a small cooler in the back with sandwiches I made from discounted grocery store bread and peanut butter packets. I stopped seeing myself in the mirror. I started to blend into the background, invisible even to myself. There was one night in late April when it snowed, unexpected, cruel. I was wrapped in 2 coats and still shaking, curled tight in the back of the camper. I remember thinking I'm going to die in this truck and no one will know until the smell gives me away. But even then, I didn't call back. I couldn't. Every morning, I still applied for jobs, I still updated my resume. I still told myself that tomorrow could be the day something changed. I submitted applications on my phone between parked shifts, reading job listings until my vision blurred. I didn't just want a paycheck, I needed proof that I wasn't disappearing. Then one afternoon, just as I was about to give up for the day, I got a call. A woman named Dana from Hearth and Ivy Interiors had seen my application and wanted to talk. It wasn't a glamorous job, warehouse support, some light customer service assisting with displays, but it was steady. It was real. I interviewed 2 days later wearing my best blouse and slacks I'd steamed by hanging them on a hanger in the truck while running the engine heat. I didn't tell her I was living in my vehicle, I just told her I was eager to work. She hired me on the spot. The pay wasn't much, just above minimum wage, but it was enough to breathe, enough to survive. I drove away from that interview with tears in my eyes and a plan in my head. I would claw my way out of this, one day at a time, $1 at a time. I didn't need their house. I would build my own, even if it killed me. I worked at Hearth and Ivy Interiors for just over a year before I could breathe again. Not financially, not entirely, but something in me settled like a heartbeat finding rhythm after a long panic. My days were simple. I arrived early, swept the showroom floors, unloaded furniture shipments, and helped rearrange display rooms to fit whatever theme corporate had decided that week. I stayed late when needed, picked up shifts no one wanted, and volunteered for weekend setups without complaint. I didn't have energy to complain anyway. I was too busy surviving. I lived with strict precision. Every cent had a purpose. I kept a spiral notebook in my glove box where I logged every dollar I spent. Gas, coffee, a pack of gum. Everything went in. I stopped eating out entirely. Lunch was always the same, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a bruised apple pulled from a cooler wedged under the driver's seat. Dinners were whatever I could heat on a camping stove in the truck bed or eat straight from the can. No new clothes, no movies, no splurges. I hand-washed my uniform in public restrooms and dried it with the vents in the truck. I became good at acting, normal, smiling at customers, making small talk with coworkers, pretending I didn't sleep in the parking lot behind the supply warehouse most nights. And yet it never felt like punishment, it felt like building. Every dollar I saved brought me closer to something solid, something mine. When my paycheck hit each week, I immediately transferred most of it into a savings account I'd named Foundation. I didn't touch it unless I had no other choice, and I rarely did. I had gone without too much for too long to sabotage myself now. By the 9th month, I started browsing property listings again, just online quietly in the evenings on my phone. I wasn't dreaming of anything big, just a roof and a front door that belonged to me. I didn't want granite countertops or a double vanity. I wanted something nobody else could take. Then in early October, I saw it. A listing for a weather-worn 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, tucked between an empty field and a line of pines. The photos weren't flattering, cracked siding, overgrown lawn wallpaper peeling in the hallway. But I looked at that house the way some people look at paintings. It was tired but still standing. The asking price was just low enough that with the right loan, I could make it work. Barely I ran the numbers 10 times, I presented my income history, my savings log, and a painfully detailed budget to the bank. They approved me for a modest mortgage with just enough breathing room to avoid disaster. The day I signed the paperwork, I sat in the realtor's office clutching a pen like it might vanish in my hand. The folder crinkled slightly when I closed it, and the brass house key she handed me still had a scrap of ribbon from the last owner. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just breathed. For the first time in a long time, it felt like that breath stayed with me. The house wasn't ready for furniture, not that I had any. The hardwood floors creaked. There was a leak under the kitchen sink, and the back steps were missing entirely. But when I opened the front door and stepped into the empty living room, it felt like sacred ground. I carried in my backpack first, then an air mattress I'd kept rolled up in the camper. That first night, I laid it out in the center of the floor, opened a tin of soup, and sat cross-legged beside the mattress as the light faded through the dusty windows. The only sound was the wind outside and the small rustle of leaves trapped in the gutter. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell the few co-workers who'd grown friendly enough to ask where I lived. This was mine. Not a declaration, not a display, just a truth I had earned with calloused hands and skipped meals. That night, I lay down on the air mattress and stared up at the cracked ceiling. My fingers grazed the key still tucked in my coat pocket. The house creaked around me like it was waking up. The cold slipped in around the window frames, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't drifting. I whispered into the dark, "This is mine." No one could evict me. No one could lock the door behind me. No one could decide I didn't belong. I had survived the unthinkable, not just being homeless, but being unwanted. And now, with nothing but four thin walls and a promise to myself, I had come home. The next morning, I stood barefoot in the kitchen and boiled water on a hot plate I'd borrowed from a neighbor. I made instant coffee and drank it standing up, watching sunlight pour across the floorboards like a quiet blessing. I had no curtains, no chairs, no fridge. But the house held me like it had been waiting for me all along. Each day after that, I cleaned a little more. I pulled weeds from the yard, patched nail holes, scrubbed windows. I planted 2 small mums out front just because I wanted to see something bloom. The old camper sat behind the house, now empty but intact. I kept it as a reminder. I never wanted to forget how far I'd come. Every time I glanced out the kitchen window and saw its faded frame, I felt something settle deeper inside me. I wasn't running anymore. I was rooted. I was home. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was scrubbing down the kitchen cabinets trying to get years of grime out of the corners when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was an urgent, repeated press, the kind that makes your stomach tighten. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the door. I didn't expect who was standing there. Jason, Brianna. My parents, and behind them their 3 kids fidgeting on the steps. I opened the door halfway. "Hannah," my mom said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, "this house is lovely." Brianna's gaze drifted across the porch through the front room like she was cataloging the space. Jason gave a slow whistle and stepped forward. "You've really made something of yourself." I stood still. "What are you doing here?" My dad spoke next, his tone casual like he was bringing up the weather. "Well, we thought it might be time to talk about family living arrangements." Brianna adjusted her sunglasses. "It just makes sense, doesn't it? You've got this big house all to yourself. We're cramped at Mom and Dad's. The kids need room. Jason works so hard." I blinked. "You're not moving in." Jason laughed, but it was tight around the edges. "Hannah, you've got the camper in the back. You've lived in it before. It's not like we're asking you to go far." "You want me to move back into the truck?" I said slowly, "so you can live in the house I bought." My mom stepped in, using that soft voice she reserved for when she was about to say something cruel. "You're always so independent. You don't even need this much space. It's just you." I felt a rising heat in my chest, not the kind that makes you explode, but the kind that hardens you. "No," I said clearly, "this is my home. No one else is moving in." There was a beat of silence. Brianna's mouth twitched. "You're being selfish." "Hannah, this is what families do. They help each other." "I asked for help," I said, my voice calm. "You all said no. You made it very clear I was on my own. So that's what I became." Jason's face darkened. "You don't mean that." "But I did." I closed the door without another word. They stood outside for a while and then one by one walked back down the steps. Brianna looked over her shoulder before she left her expression unreadable. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I came home from work to find the locks changed. The brass knob I'd installed was gone. A different one sat in its place, shinier, newer, not mine. There was a doormat out front I didn't recognize, and the smell of some overly sweet air freshener seeped through the crack in the door. I ran to the back. The camper, which had been parked neatly under the trees, had been dragged to the edge of the yard closer to the fence. Its back hatch was open like someone had rummaged through it. I knocked. The door swung open and Jason was standing in the entryway. "What are you doing here?" I said. Brianna appeared behind him holding a cup of tea. "We live here now." "You're trespassing." Jason shook his head, then pulled a stack of papers from a side table. "Actually, no. You signed this remember lease agreement, gave us permission to move in." He handed it over. My name was printed at the bottom in a shaky imitation of my handwriting. The signature was close, but not close enough. I looked up at him. "You forged this." "No," Brianna said smoothly. "You just forgot." We figured it out for you. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and called the police. I gave the address and said clearly that I was the legal owner of the property and that I had intruders inside my home. Then I sat on the front steps and waited, hands shaking, not from fear, but from fury. The officers arrived in under 15 minutes. I met them at the curb and handed over the actual deed, my ID, and then pulled up the footage from my porch security camera I had installed it months earlier, more for delivery theft than anything else. But now it played like a movie. My family walking up the steps, unlocking the door, hauling boxes inside, switching the locks. When the officers knocked on the door, Jason tried to talk over them, waving the forged lease. But one glance was enough. They asked him where the lease was signed, on what date. I showed them a photo of my plane ticket from that week. I had been in another state visiting a friend. The signature didn't match. The story didn't hold. The officers didn't yell. They didn't raise their voices. They simply said it was time to leave or the next conversation would happen at the station. Brianna's calm cracked. First, she started crying, saying it was unfair that the kids would be traumatized, that they had nowhere else to go. Jason didn't cry. His jaw clenched as he carried their things back out onto the lawn. They had brought so much boxes of toys, clothes, even a set of kitchen knives. They thought this would be permanent. I didn't say a word. I stood with the officers until the last box was in the car. When they were finally gone, I walked back inside. The air was thick with synthetic floral spray. I opened every window, letting the October wind clear the space. The next day, I changed the locks again. I installed cameras on the side yard and back gate. I met with a lawyer. I wasn't just protecting my home anymore. I was protecting the line I had drawn, the one they thought they could cross with fake papers and forced smiles. I had built this life from nothing, and I wasn't letting anyone steal it. Not again, not ever. I didn't post it right away. For days after they tried to take my house, I wrote and rewrote the words in my head. Every version started too angry or too defensive, but eventually I realized it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be honest. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when I finally sat down and opened my laptop. I pulled the police report from the drawer beside the fridge where I had tucked it beneath a stack of unpaid parking tickets and appliance manuals. I laid it flat on the table and let it anchor me. The screen glowed softly in the dim kitchen light. My fingers hovered over the keys before I began to type. I started with the facts. My name, my job, the year I lost everything I wrote about sleeping in my truck behind a gym, the freezing nights, the silence from my family when I called. I wrote about saving for this house, about how hard it was to hold on to hope when no one offered you a place to stand. Then I told the truth about what happened after the unannounced visit, the demand that I move out, the forged lease, the locks changed, the police, the footage. The way they stood on my porch and acted like I owed them something, like everything I had built didn't belong to me. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. I attached screenshots of the lease they forged, photos of the door cam footage, a copy of the actual police report with the case number circled in red. At the end, I wrote, "I've been quiet for a long time, maybe too long, but this time I'm not hiding. This happened. I didn't imagine it, and I'm done pretending I deserved to be erased." I hit post and shut the laptop. Then I turned off the lights and went to bed. By morning, the post had already been shared 17 times. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 100. The comments came in slowly at first. A cousin from Missouri I hadn't spoken to in years wrote, "I always wondered why they treated you different. Good for you for saying it." Then came others, people I barely remembered, from high school neighbors from the old street, even a teacher from middle school. One message stood out, "Hannah, I remember how they treated you when we were kids. I used to think it wasn't fair, but I didn't know how to say anything. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." I stared at that message for a long time before responding. I don't think I'd ever heard anyone outside my own head say those words. Another cousin sent me a grocery gift card. An old friend from college offered to connect me to a client looking for freelance marketing help. One woman from town messaged just to say, "You're not alone." Not everyone was supportive. A few distant relatives commented vague things like, "This is family business, not for the internet," or "Some things should stay private." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Those comments got buried beneath rows of hearts and replies from people who had seen the truth laid bare and decided it mattered. The silence from my parents was louder than any comment. They didn't call, didn't message, didn't try to explain. I don't know if they saw it, but I know Jason did. He removed me from his friends list within 24 hours of the post going up. I printed out the police report and pinned it to the fridge, not as a warning, as a reminder. For years, I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd keep the peace. That silence was grace. That not making waves was maturity. But it wasn't grace, it was erasure. And now, for the first time, I wasn't the ghost at the table. I was the one telling the story. It didn't solve everything. My life didn't suddenly become easy. I still worked long hours, still clipped coupons, still checked the thermostat twice before turning on the heat. But inside, something had shifted. The weight I had carried since I was a child, the burden of being the one no one clapped for, began to lift. In the weeks that followed, a few of the people who had ignored me most stepped quietly into the shadows, and a few I never expected stepped into the light. One afternoon, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded card with a short note written in unfamiliar handwriting. "I don't know you, but I read your story. Thank you for telling it. It helped me tell mine." Tucked inside was a pressed daisy. I keep it on the windowsill. Sometimes truth doesn't roar. Sometimes it lands soft and still and changes everything anyway. I still have the camper in the backyard. I haven't moved it. It sits there like a monument to every night. I told myself not to give up. Sometimes when the sun hits it just right, it reflects a narrow beam of light onto the kitchen wall. It's not beautiful, but it's mine, like everything I have now. Like the words I finally said. And every morning now when I drink my coffee and check the post, I know I'm not invisible anymore. I was never asking for attention. I just wanted the truth to have a place to live. Now it does. Right here in this house, in my hands, in the open, where everyone can see it. It started with a whisper. Not from the family. Of course they kept their secrets until they couldn't, but from outside, a neighbor. A woman named Marla who used to live 2 doors down from my parents and never missed a thing. She was the first to say it out loud. I was at work sorting through a shipment of lighting fixtures when I saw her name pop up in my messages. We weren't close. She was more of a community fixture than a friend, but she'd commented supportively on my Facebook post weeks earlier. This time, she sent just 2 lines. "You didn't hear this from me, but Brianna's been seen with someone. Not Jason." I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen for a while, then slipped the phone back into my pocket and went back to work. I didn't want to know. Not in the way people crave gossip, but a part of me, a quiet, hollow part, did want confirmation that the pedestal Jason had always been placed on wasn't real. 2 weeks later, I got the rest of the story. It came from Aunt Karen, who called me unexpectedly one evening while I was folding laundry. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. She was the only one in the extended family who ever truly saw through the shine my parents tried to project. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. "It's all falling apart," she said. "Jason found out one of the kids isn't his. Brianna had been seeing someone on the side. He did a paternity test." I kept folding. He didn't want to believe it, but the results were clear. "What's he going to do?" I asked, though. I wasn't sure why. "Filed for divorce last week, moved out. The kids are with your parents for now. It's a mess." I said nothing. Karen waited, then added gently, "I just thought you should know in case anyone tries to make it about you." That made me pause, because that's exactly the kind of thing they would do. Blame me for upsetting the balance, for breaking the silence, for making the family story harder to believe. "Thanks," I said, "but I'm not involved. I haven't been for a long time." And I meant it. Jason didn't call. Neither did Brianna. But my mother tried twice. The first time, I let the call ring out. The second time, she left a voicemail. "Hannah." Her voice began strained and hesitant. "I know things have been tense, but we could use your help with the kids for a few days. It's complicated right now." She didn't mention the forged lease or the police or the attempt to steal my home. I deleted the message. After that, I started to hear things secondhand. Jason had moved into a one-bedroom apartment near the industrial park, barely big enough for his clothes and an air mattress. Brianna went back to her parents' place in another county with the youngest child, the one who wasn't his. No one knew if she planned to come back. The house they'd all been crammed into, the one my parents clung to like a badge of endurance, was too quiet now. No footsteps down the hall, no kids yelling, just disappointment echoing through the walls. One day on my walk through the neighborhood, I passed a bulletin board outside the library. Tacked between job ads and garage sale flyers was a small paper that read, "Roommate needed, clean, responsible, flexible rent, no smoking call. Jason." The number was his. I stared at it for a long moment before walking away. Sometimes I thought I might feel satisfied, vindicated. But I didn't. What I felt was a sort of cold distance, like watching a storm hit a house I had already moved out of. It didn't make me happy. It didn't hurt either. It just confirmed what I had always suspected. Things built on lies never last. That summer, I stayed busy. Hearth and Ivy offered me a new position with slightly better pay and more hours. I painted the living room of my house in a warm, sandy beige and bought a second-hand coffee table from a flea market. Slowly, the air in the house began to feel lived and real. I rarely thought about Jason, but when I did, it was like remembering a version of him that had never existed, the one my parents built out of hope and favoritism, the golden boy who never had to try. That version was gone now, replaced by a man who had made just enough bad choices to be brought down by his own entitlement. A few more messages came in over the following months. Cousins who used to gush about how put together Jason and Brianna were suddenly had questions. "Did you know?" one of them asked. "Did you suspect anything?" I didn't answer. One person messaged me just to say, "Guess you were right all along." But I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in being free. By the end of the year, the news had stopped traveling. The scandal faded. People moved on or pretended to. My parents no longer sent group texts or invitations. Birthdays passed without mention. Holidays came and went, quiet and undisturbed. And still I didn't miss them. I walked through the rooms of my home without flinching. I cooked dinner in silence and lit candles without needing company. I took out the trash, repaired a leaky pipe, and paid my bills on time. I lived. One evening, I opened my front door to a breeze that smelled like pine and distant rain. I stood there a while watching the sky shift from blue to gold, thinking about how far I'd come. No one could tell me what I owed anymore. No one could spin my silence into weakness. They had finally felt what I had once lived through: abandonment, disappointment, betrayal. The difference was, I didn't crumble. They did. And I didn't need to say a word to make it happen. I just needed to walk away and never turn back. I wake up earlier these days, not because I have to, but because I like the quiet morning light moves slowly through the kitchen windows, now pooling across the floors. I refinished myself last fall. The house feels lived in. It creaks with familiarity. My slippers are always exactly where I left them. The silence no longer feels hollow. It feels earned. Most mornings start the same coffee brewed in the old French press I bought at a yard sale, 2 slices of toast with peanut butter, and 5 minutes of stillness on the front porch. I sit wrapped in a faded cardigan, the one with holes in the sleeves, and watch the light move across the garden. I planted sunflowers out there this spring. They're taller than I expected, rising with more defiance than grace, but they still make me smile. I rent out the extra rooms now. One to Rachel, a night shift nurse at the hospital up the road. She's quiet, reliable, never leaves dishes in the sink. The other room went to Luis, an engineer who travels 2 weeks out of every month and keeps his shoes lined up like a museum exhibit. They're good people, kind. They knock before entering any space that isn't theirs. They don't ask invasive questions. They say good morning without expecting conversation. I don't consider them friends exactly. We share space, not lives, but there's comfort in the rhythm we've found. Sometimes Jason's older 2 kids visit on weekends. My parents don't drop them off. Jason does, carefully avoiding eye contact as he pulls up, leaves the engine running, and walks them to the porch with a backpack and a bag of snacks. He never stays long. We say little more than hello and goodbye. But the kids, Emma and Max, light up like porch bulbs when they see me. Emma likes to draw. She spends hours with a box of colored pencils at the kitchen table, sketching imaginary houses with curved doors and sunflowers, twice as tall as the roof. Max prefers the backyard. He's taken over the old tire swing I tied to the oak tree, spending afternoons flying back and forth like the breeze belongs to him. One Saturday, as I was weeding the side of the garden, Max asked, "Why do you live alone?" "Aunt Hannah." I paused, wiped my hands on my jeans, and looked at him. "Because I like it." I said, "Because it feels like mine." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Later that evening, as the kids built a blanket fort in the living room, Emma turned to me and whispered, "I like your house better than Grandma's. It feels quieter." I smiled and said nothing. There are no family dinners now, no invitations to holidays, no expectation to show up and sit in the corner while someone else is celebrated. I spend those days the way I spend most others on my terms. I roast vegetables, light candles, read books from the used bookstore downtown. I write in a leather notebook I keep on my nightstand, not for anyone else to read, just to remind myself I still have a voice. The home is clean, but not sterile, lived in, but never cluttered. Sometimes I leave a dish in the sink or let the laundry pile up, but when I move through these rooms, I never flinch. I never wonder if I belong. I never wait for someone to knock and tell me I'm in the way. This is mine. There are days I think about the past, not with anger, not even with sadness, just recognition. A nod to the roads I walked through to get here. I remember sleeping in my truck, eating cold soup in gas station parking lots, holding my breath when the wind pushed against the camper walls. I remember calling home and hearing laughter instead of comfort. But I don't carry those memories like wounds anymore. They're like old scars, just part of the story. I touch them now and then, mostly to remind myself how far I've come. I don't need apologies. I don't need explanations. I don't need anyone to understand what it felt like to be erased. That chapter closed itself. What I have now is quieter than forgiveness. It's peace. I find joy in the smallest things: a perfectly boiled egg, a fresh bedsheet lying dried in the sun, the way the house hums when everyone is asleep. I've built something no one can take from me, not because it's made of brick or wood, but because it's built on truth. No borrowed space, no forced silence, no pretending. I once thought family meant you had to stay no matter the cost, that walking away was failure, that choosing yourself meant losing them. But now I know better. Family at its core is about respect, about safety. And when those things are gone, what you walk toward matters more than what you leave behind. My house isn't loud. It doesn't overflow with laughter or chaos, but it is full in its own way. With art on the walls, sunflowers by the windows, and warmth in the rooms that once echoed empty. This is the life I made. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, but out of the quiet promise I once made to myself, lying on an air mattress in an empty room, whispering, "This is mine." And it still is. Hannah's story is one of quiet endurance and hard-won freedom. Cast aside by those who should have protected her, she faced the harshest challenges alone. Yet through every cold night, every closed door, and every moment of doubt, she chose not to disappear, but to rebuild. In a world that often rewards the loud and the favored, Hannah showed the quiet power of self-worth and the strength found in stillness. She did not seek revenge or recognition. She simply chose to live on her own terms with dignity and peace. Her home is more than a structure. It is a testament to survival, to choosing yourself when no one else will. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Then if you feel called like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts or subscribe for more true stories of strength, healing, and hope.